past Polish-Jewish relations in subsequent debates there. Please join me in welcoming Dariusz Stola.
Well, thanks to Diana, I had to review the plan of my presentation, but I hope it will be more productive in bringing some aspects of this history which I initially neglected and then I see to be crucial. Well, my understanding of writing the history of Polish Jews in the post-war era is that first the problem we start from is who are we speaking about, which is the size of the population and the nature of this population. And this is a very peculiar group. The estimates of the size vary by about 100,000 people, between 250,000 and some 350,000 people. I speak about the Polish Jews present in the territory of Poland in post-war borders, because the group of Polish Jews is much more vague. Some of the survivors of concentration camps did not return to Poland from the DP camps, and we have a dark number of Polish Jews who remained in the Soviet Union for various reasons, and here it's the least known group. Actually, only the research have only started recently to find out what happened to them. I'm going to speak about the Polish Jews who did return to Poland after the war, and I stress return because most of them, something like 90% of them, maybe 85% of them, had survived the war outside of the German-occupied Polish territory, and strictly speaking, in the Soviet Union. So this is the largest group, and notably, returned because most of them, something like 90% of them, 10 years ago, 85% of them, practically neglected. Had survived the war outside of the German-occupied Polish territory, and strictly speaking, in the Soviet Union. So this is the largest group, and notably, it's returned because Central Asia or somewhere in the Gulag camps. So the initial problems with the size and the structure of this population, well, I take some middle-of-the-road estimates of some 300,000 people, but essential questions emerge, such as what is the gender structure? At that time, gender and sex was almost the same, not as today, but it's a major question. I was trying to find out, and what I learned that in some documents, especially when you have the statistics of the repatriates from the Soviet Union, I would say it's natural. It's 102%, it's 52% female or 52% male. It's very close to 50-50. But when you have on regional reports, you have a striking male domination, which would be counterintuitive when you think about the survivors. Among the Jewish survivors of the Holocaust in German-occupied Poland, clearly there is the reverse, and for obvious reasons. You have female survivors overrepresented. However, why it's, to my knowledge, no one tried to understand it. It seems that at least regionally in Silesia, you have a strong domination of male Jews in communist Poland, which has far-reaching consequences for the rate of intermarriage, endogamy, the capacity for exogamy or endogamy, and of course for the halachic origins of their children and grandchildren later on. This is one, that we have some problems with the initial population. Second, that this population is very fluid. And there is not a single moment we can say, at this moment we have 300,000 Jews in Poland. No, there was no such moment at all. Because this moment of estimates is sometime between the summer of 1944 and the end of 1946, or practically summer of 1946, when you have the peak number of Jews in Poland before the Kielce pogrom in 1946, when you have a kind of a panic outflow of some 70,000 people in a few months. So there was no single moment of 300,000 Jews present in Poland. Probably at the peak moment there were some 200, 250,000 Jews in Poland, right before the Kielce pogrom, before the summer of 1946. But what is important, almost all of them are immigrants. And I'm referring, I was late for Jan Tomasz Gross' presentation yesterday, and he mentioned some long-term tendencies in auto-migration of Jews from Eastern Europe. What is striking that almost all the Jews present in Poland after the war had to immigrate to Poland before that moment. And even though those who remained in occupied Poland during the war, they were de facto emigrants because they had been in hiding or elsewhere or in the camps. So very few Jews had remained in the places of origin, the hometowns, before 1945. So you have a rather unique situation in history when you have a population of ex-refugees. People who are in all I'm a migration scholar. People who had a very strong previous experience of emigration. And we know from practically everywhere in the world that people with a previous history of migration have a tendency for migration. It's much easier for them to make the decision to move again than to people who had known. So this is quite unusual situation. And second, it's of course a post-Holocaust population with all the aspects that have been analyzed so far. Second, between this moment and 1970, the key process shaping this group is out-migration. Because at the end of it, no more than 10% remain. So we have 300,000 sometime between 1944 and 1947. At the end of it, we have maybe 15,000. Before the anti-Zionist campaign in 67, 68, we have some 25 to 30,000 Jews. Plus we have a number of very non-Jewish Jews who were Jews for the security officers in the spring of 1968 when they needed some Jews to chase them. And this is really interesting because that may add another dark number of people who are not Jews in any civilized definition of a Jew at any moment, but then yes, for some security officers they are, and they are becoming Jews by declaring themselves Jewish and declaring intention to resettle to Israel. Most of them eventually didn't go to Israel, but at least they had to declare it. And so we have this long-term process, but it happens in stages. You have 4 waves of very intensive outflow and periods of relatively limited, almost no inflow. And finally, there are at least 3 periods of different policies or institutional settings for the organized Jewish life in Poland. Organized Jewish life and the private life of Jews in Poland. And these are 1940s, when you have Poland run by the communists, but it's not yet a communist Poland. It's not yet a communist state. You have a relative pluralism. You have opposition parties. At the early moment, you have quite strong anti-communist armed underground and so on. Then you have the high Stalinism. It sounds very similar to what Diana has mentioned just about. Then you have high Stalinism, which in Poland is about 1949 to 1954. And then you have the transition period, 55, 56, 57. And then you have the really existing socialism, 1960s up to the 6-Day War and the beginning of the anti-Zionist campaign. And in this period, you have, in fact, different models of integration of Jews into the Polish society. In the early post-war period, there is something like a limited pluralism. That means you have quite a number of Jewish political parties operating, including Bund, which was unthinkable in the Soviet Union at that time. But I would say these are not any Jewish parties. For example, Zionist revisionists who submitted a request to be legalized were refused. And this is a kind of a folks front. This is the popular front of those who are ready to support the new democracy and they can legally operate. But it includes the general Zionists, at least some of the general Zionists at that time. And this ends, I think this is an insufficiently recognized moment in the history of Polish Jews, the moment of the struggle against the right-wing nationalist deviation. That was the reason why Comrade Gomułka lost his position. But he lost his position because of alleged Polish right-wing nationalist deviation. And up till recently, I was thinking about losing. We're not losing. Look at who are some of them were not the parallels Jewish to Moscow leadership group of nationalists, Polish nationalists, were some Jewish nationalists. Later on, Jewish nationalism had an upper hand, but not the Jewish street, so to speak, not in the Jewish organizations. Some of the Jewish communists or communist Jews made sure that the Jewish nationalists don't have an upper hand. So, 1949 is an important moment because the general Gleichschaltung, that means most of the Jewish organizations disappear, but contrary, for example, to the Soviet Union, there is something like a secular Jewish representation, the Social Cultural Association of Jews in Poland, and controlled by substitute to the end of this period, you have presenting everyone is transition and the communist. Important forms of all the Jewish, because we are plurals. What is striking for a period, which was to be Polish nation state, ethno, and we have expression by a Jewish exile communist bulletin in Moscow during the war 1943, and he prophesizes that the future people's Poland will be a Polish nation state. And its meaning of the term is ethno-nation. But the war, there is an interlocution relevant or who ethnic Poles can leave the Soviet Union and move as the second eligible category. So you have the Polish ethno-national state, for example, in the high Stalinist, it's allowed initially in a very of Arab states, the West, millions of dollars. The success of this integration policy I measure by the relative mixed families, mixed marriage. The profile of this new Polish religion doesn't know much about it. The of Polish Jews into the general society of Poland, and for not good reasons. Identify with Polish culture against support, vital material support in this. How much historiography do we have? I have written about various ways of immigration, and so I know there is a number of specific monographs of communities, regions, and it's very much about the policies. Books on this topic, on the self-perception, self-understanding of in Warsaw, and how they lived when they thought about themselves and their neighbors. It's interesting that in all these groups, you have striking prominence to socialize with other similar people. Family is completely acculturated, very far away from any nationalism, but still most of the people, they drink coffee, play bridge, and spend summer vacations are similar people developed by the sociologists. There are two definitions of it I use. Communists had a very narrow definition of social capital. They didn't read Bourdieu. They didn't know that you can have different first, a very positive impact. That means it allowed for not necessarily welcome to West Germany. So when we Israel in the Stalin era, notable. Is this conference today in Potsdam? Renewal of the this beautiful conversation between already in 1946 some of the Jews repatriating to Poland.
And also given that the borders of the country obviously hasn't changed, can you talk more about the different migration routes? So, you know, some from Roma, right, could decide to migrate to Poland, but could
September 1st, 1939. There was almost no
disparity. A complicated thing I'd like to do is this book, Social Association of the 40s.
and the practice was sometimes chaotic. Whatever communists did to the Jews in Prague Spring. So that broader criticism of the museum and this exhibition Jewish destiny. The key question the domestic security. It pre-existed. Know how much they actually knew about post-war Poland when being in life. Okay, there was diaspora organizations.
3:15, 15 minutes later than it says on the official schedule. But before we go, for the talk.